Hey guys, welcome to FoundFlix. Chucky lovers rejoice as our favorite sadistic doll has returned in the new film Cult of Chucky, out now on home video. Before the movie even came out, I had a bunch of people asking for an ending explained on it, and I can see how where the story goes in the end can be confusing. But rather than this video being entirely an ending explained, it will be more of a hybrid, giving my review of the film and then explaining the ending, as well as the post-credit scene, giving us some idea of where the franchise might be headed going forward, which is really awesome. So let's begin with my thoughts on Chucky's latest adventure, the impressive 7th entry in the long-running Child's Play franchise. One thing I've always enjoyed about the franchise is its ability to reinvent itself with each entry. So even as more Chucky movies were made, they were all different and surprising enough to feel fresh. Their consistent creativity is interesting because the series has been written by the same person throughout its entirety, Don Mancini. It's very unusual for a horror franchise to have a single creative voice behind each film, and I think that's a big part of the series' longtime durability. Mancini knows the Chucky character better than anyone else, and is somehow always able to cook up fresh takes on the character. Initially, the doll was kept mostly in the shadows, and the first film, Child's Play, is still most likely the best film in the series. The first 3 entries mostly focused on child in peril kind of terror, with the Chucky doll going after the Barclay family in an attempt to claim their son Andy's body for his own. But then after the lackluster military school set Child's Play 3, which was rushed into production, released only 1 year after part 2, the series returned years later, completely reinvented with the much more comedically infused Bride of Chucky. The doll always had a twisted sense of humor, and Bride pushed that aspect much more to the forefront, but amazingly, the series pulls off this transition well, and the movie is funny but also chock full of good kills and standard horror moments as well. The next sequel, Seed of Chucky, saw Mancini take on directorial as well as writing duties, and it doubled down on the humor of Bride with mixed results. Considered by many to be the weakest in the franchise, it feels more like a satire on Hollywood than really resembling a Child's Play film anymore. The movie has its moments, but lost too much of the series' original spirit, and after the movie failed at the box office, it looked like the series was in need of reinvention once again. Luckily, Mancini was up to the challenge, and 2013's Curse of Chucky is a bold change from Seed that returns the franchise to its horror roots, ditching much of the humor for a more gothic style of horror set in a remote house. At first, the story feels detached from the series purposefully, and it seems Mancini's intent was to reboot the story, or at least the tone of the series in a way, but Curse did indeed continue the continuity of previous films, and in the end, it tied back into the series in surprising and interesting ways. Overall, a resounding success, Curse of Chucky made Chucky scary again, and in my opinion is the second best in the series after the first, Child's Play. That's why I was even more excited to see where Mancini would take the series next, after we saw the surprising returns of both Tiffany and a now grown-up Andy to the franchise, who both briefly appeared in Curse. And fortunately, I believe that Cult of Chucky is able to pay off on what we would want as longtime fans. It introduces several creative elements to the plots that haven't been seen in the franchise in any form, and it says a lot that Cult is able to juggle so many things at once and mostly pull it off. I did wonder if the film would end up being a lot funnier or just not as scary as Curse, but it is much more serious in tone than I would have expected. Sure, it's still plenty silly, I mean it is a killer doll after all, but I didn't feel like it went too overboard with the humor and still packed a punch in many surprisingly gory moments. So it seems the franchise has found a happy balance between the horror and humor that the series has vacillated between in the past. It's always been able to pull those stylistic pivots off, with each entry shaking up the formula, and it takes that approach once again with Cult. After the gothic horror of Curse, here we move on to the genre of asylum horror, with Nica blamed for the previous film's murders, now in psychiatric lockup at a weird modern hospital facility. Mentally, she's not holding up so well, might have something to do with all the shock treatments, and she's been convinced by everyone that Chucky isn't real and that she is responsible for the murders. And after hearing it so much from everyone else, she also begins to believe she may have been responsible for what happened. The movie plays with this idea quite a bit as Chucky shows up at the hospital and the bodies start piling up. But is it really Chucky back to kill again, or is Nica actually the one killing the patients and doesn't realize it because she's lost her mind? We of course know it's Chucky, but it's an interesting kind of storyline to attach to the film, and it does at points take on the feeling of a full-on psychological thriller. On top of that, we have original trilogy protagonist Andy Barclay returning to the series after briefly appearing in the post-credit scene of Curse, where he is sent a Chucky doll in the mail by Tiffany. Luckily, he was prepared started blowing its head to pieces with a shotgun. He is also suffering from mental anguish after his experiences with Chucky as a child and is clearly still traumatized 30 years later. Even though he shot the doll, its head is still living, kept in a safe in Andy's cabin, where Andy takes it out to talk to it and torture it. It's a bit demented, but if you can't kill Chucky, you might as well have some fun blowtorching his head on a Friday night. Am I right? While it was awesome seeing Andy back, he didn't have quite the impact on the main story as I might have thought at first. He does play a sizable role, eventually getting locked up in the asylum with Nica, but ultimately didn't add a whole lot and felt like a bit of a letdown for his big return. Just like Curse, this is Fiona Dourif as Nica's movie. She continues to impress here, taking us along on Nica's journey into madness, and in the end we get to see just how versatile she is, being introduced to a very different personality to Nica. But enough about the humans already, this is Chucky's movie after all. Luckily they kept the CG to a minimum here, using actual dolls, which is a huge relief. Chucky here is his typical sadistic self and has several new victims at his gruesome disposal. Probably the standout kill here is with Claire, who is strapped to a bed unable to move due to medication. Chucky comes across a tank of compressed air and, confused about what it is, drops the tank on the ground, sending it flying through a giant overhead window. It explodes into millions of shards, falling in slow motion before eviscerating Claire. It was brutal and actually quite visually beautiful, something I wouldn't really associate with the series. Beyond killing, Chucky here has a new mission: to create a cult of Chuckies. That's right, an army of Chucky dolls out there killing people. He recently learned a new spell that gives him the ability to bring other dolls to life with his spirit, and this leads to the best sequence in the film. 3 Chuckies, all working together as one to brutally kill Nurse Carlos. We've never seen more than one living Chucky doll at once, and for me this was just awesome. And I loved how it played out in the film, with each doll showing off slightly different looks and personalities. I can only imagine what a pain in the ass it was to coordinate all those dolls in these scenes. But I'll tell you what, it was worth it. Overall, the movie was already really entertaining, but the multiple Chucky aspect sent it to a whole new level. And again, one that I never actually expected to see show up in the series. Another thing we've never actually seen happen in the series is Chucky getting a new body. Which brings us to the end of Cult of Chucky that pushes the franchise into a really exciting and also surprising new direction. But obviously, of course, for me to talk about that, I will have to spoil the ending. So let's dive in and explain how things go down in the end. As I mentioned briefly, a big story aspect introduced in Cult of Chucky is a new spell that Chucky has discovered on voodooForDummies.com, apparently. All of the powers at the core of the series are voodoo in nature, and it was a voodoo ritual that transferred the spirit of Charles Lee Ray into the Chucky doll in the first place. This same incantation also allowed him to possess the body of the first person who found out he was alive in the doll, the plot of the first 3 films. But this new spell is much more powerful, granting Chucky a much more dangerous ability. Rather than having restrictions on who he can possess, this spell allows him to possess anybody or anything. Anything on 2 legs, as he says. It's this spell that allows him to bring to life the other Chucky dolls in the film at the hospital, each with Charles Lee Ray's spirit inside. He must have figured this out sometimes near the end scenes of Curse, as there is one doll sent to Andy, which he still has, in addition to the one that Tiffany brings to the hospital. Now that there are multiple dolls out there, his spirit can basically never be killed. But it does seem that the original doll is the one that Andy has in his safe, with the scarred look Chucky took on after Bride. Beyond dolls, Chucky can also now possess people with his spirit, which in the end he does with Nica. She begs him to kill her, but he has something else in mind, saying there are worse things than death taking over her body. While it seems that he wanted her dead, it looks like Chucky has bigger plans now in the outside world, able to blend in with Nica's body. And along with the possession, Nica is now able to walk, which is ironic since it was Charles' botched delivery of her as a child that made her immobile in the first place. Also throughout the film, Chucky was trying to convince her to be a killer and she refused to follow through. But now that Charles' spirit is inside of her, she gives in, finally lashing out and stomping the pervy doctor to death. Nica isn't completely gone, however, and is now a recessed part of the vessel that is Nica's body, with Charles now in control. So it is still possible to bring her back, but for now she is basically Chucky in Nica's body, taken over by the serial killer's evil spirit. As far as Chucky's other longtime nemesis, Andy is still locked up at the asylum. He did manage to take out one of the Chucky dolls, but Chucky as Nica shows up toying with him and locking him up in his room. Also, rather than killing Andy, he is more interested in giving Andy the chance to defeat him, obviously getting a thrill out of their several decade-long rivalry. Andy and Chucky, friends till the end. Isn't that nice? But it's definitely hard to say how Andy can possibly explain all the bodies all over the hospital, especially since he's the same one that was saying a doll killed those people all those years ago. There's also still one Chucky that stays behind at the hospital with the one arm, returning to a lifeless appearance. This is no doubt so Charles can keep an eye on Andy going forward. So Chucky makes it out of the hospital in Nica's body, reuniting with his former lover Tiffany. Well, it's actually the spirit of his dead girlfriend Tiffany in the body of actress Jennifer Tilly. Yeah. At the end of Seed, Tiffany transferred her spirit from the doll to the actress who played Tiffany. Yes, it's confusing and ridiculous. In the backseat of the car is the Tiffany doll, which also comes alive, indicating that she can also use the new spell to transfer her spirit, bringing her doll back to life. And despite the body switch, Tiffany doesn't seem to have a problem with Charles as Nica, and the two kiss, reuniting once again. This all sets us up for a potential 8th part in the series where possessed Nica and Tiffany work together as a kind of demented Thelma and Louise, which actually sounds really awesome, and I hope we get to see that paid off. I also like the idea that Nica and Tiffany's relationship ends up taking them to a different end game than what Charles actually wants. It would be hilarious to see the doll Chucky at odds with Nica and Tiffany and potentially working against them to achieve his own plans. Otherwise, it's up to Andy to track down and stop them, but considering his current situation, he's gonna need some help, which we see he does, revealed in the post-credit scene. Back at Andy's cabin, the original Chucky head is still alive. The door opens and it's revealed to be Kyle, saying that Andy sent her and begins to take his place torturing the doll. Kyle, of course, was the young rebellious teenager that lived at the foster home with Andy in Child's Play 2, and they must have stayed in contact all these years, affected by their past incident with the doll. Hopefully Kyle will be able to figure out a way to get Andy out of the hospital so they can stop Nica and Tiffany. One thing is for sure, it sounds like part 8 of the series is going to be a wild and very different ride for the series to tackle going forward, and I honestly can't wait to see what Mancini cooks up next. There you have it, folks. Cult of Chucky is a very worthwhile addition to the series, and at this point I put it still slightly under Curse. But Cult is still a lot of fun, brimming with what Chucky fans want and also loaded with creative new concepts previously unexplored, and an ending that will give this series a lot more to work with in potential sequels. What did you guys think of Cult of Chucky? Which Child's Play movie is your favorite? And who do you think would win in a fight, Chucky or Annabelle? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow. Thanks for watching FoundFlix. See you next time.